So, hi there and welcome to our latest webinar for employees. This is our regular weekly slot that we have for the employees to help them with the Kickstart scheme with various knowledge and skills that would be really useful for them, not just while they're on the Kickstart scheme, but in their career and life going forward. We're very fortunate again today to have the lovely Gemma Bailey. Say hello, Gemma.
Hello. Hello, Gemma.
Yeah. So we're very fortunate because Gemma's one of the foremost experts in her particular field, and she's very kindly agreed to help with this scheme. So I'll pass you over to Gemma now, and she can talk about the subject she's going to speak on today.
Lovely, thank you very much. All right, hello everybody. Today's webinar is all about communication in the workplace, and I'm going to share with you some strategies that are really helpful for making sure that you not only communicate in the best possible way, but that also you make sure that you completely understand what other people are communicating to you before you go ahead and take action on those things. So I've got three main strategies that I'm going to share with you today that I think are going to be not just useful for you, but I think you're going to find some of these like super interesting as well. And it's really going to get you thinking a lot more about your own communication style. So without further ado, let me introduce myself and the organization that I represent. So I work for a company called People Building, and what we do is we provide mental health support and resources for employees. So if you are currently in a brand new role as a Kickstart employee, one of the things that your employers have to provide you with is an adequate amount of support around your mental and emotional well-being, and that's kind of where we come in. So we have an online platform and we've got different articles, videos, podcasts, all sorts of different resources that help to maintain the wellness of your state of mind and your emotions during your time at work. And it's something that for your boss, you can just mention to them that it's a really cost-effective way for them to address mental health challenges as and when they might come up. We also provide unlimited free consultations for a reactive solution. So life happens to all of us at some point in time. And if you find that there's something that interrupts your usual state of mind or your confidence, then you can speak to your employer about working with us. And one of our practitioners will be able to sit down, have a chat with you, whether that's face-to-face or on Zoom like we are right now, and to find out a little bit more about what's going on and provide you with the types of strategies that you will need to get yourself through that point in time. And some of those might be quite similar to what I'm going to be sharing with you today. So we use NHS approved assessments and measures that provide evidence of effectiveness that can then be used by the HR, so the human resources team, that then help to support you in perhaps getting back to work if you've had to take some time off sick. So for info about me, I am a trainer of something called NLP, and that stands for Neurolinguistic Programming. So it's all about the crossover between how you think, how you communicate that in your language, and also different sorts of habits or patterns of behavior that you might have as well. So I teach these strategies to an accredited level so that other people can put them into practice too. My expertise is in mental and emotional well-being. So I myself, as well as teaching this, I'm also a practitioner. So I work with clients when they've got various different mental health challenges too. I'm also a franchisor. So I own a children's franchise called NLP for Kids. And within that, I have a team of around 22 other people who work underneath our branding and put all of these different skills into practice. I'm an entrepreneur and a content creator. So I'll mention to you at the very end, for example, our YouTube channel, where you can go off and find lots of other content that ties in with what I'll be sharing with you today. And as I mentioned there, I am a YouTuber, a podcaster, and an author. But most importantly for today, I am also an employer. So some of the experiences that I'm going to be talking to you about today are actually based on my own experiences of working in an office with other people, and taking on new employees, and knowing all of the sorts of questions and concerns that you have when you get started in a new role, and also what that sounds like for me as an employer, and how sometimes we can really end up at cross purposes because we're just not on the same page with our communication. So that's what we're going to be looking at to correct today. So first off, let's just take a look at what communication is all about. So when we think about communication, it's very easy to just think that it's like we are now, talking. It's not just that. Communication comes across in so many different ways and through so many different mediums these days as well. We've all had the experience of receiving a text message and not quite knowing how the person intended us to receive that message, because there was no intonation, there was no tone of voice that came with it. And so, you can maybe get offended a bit too easily because you put emphasis on the wrong word as you were reading it. So words are definitely part of our communication, but tone of voice is also really important. And interestingly, there is a tone of voice that comes out of your mouth, but you also use a tone of voice inside your head when you're talking to yourself in there as well. And that's something that's useful to know about because it can really change your own motivation levels. There's a big difference between saying to yourself, I can do it, and I can do it. So, even inside your own mind, tone of voice is super important. And then there is our physical body. So what we do with our bodies when we are interacting with other people. If you say that looks really interesting at the same time as turning your back and walking away, your physiology, your physical body is going to be communicating something quite different to your words. So you can see we've got this pie chart here, and what's missing is the actual percentages. So what this is telling us is when we communicate with other people, so we call that how we communicate in congruence with others. So when you communicate with other people, we can break down those 3 areas of communication and notice that some of them carry a greater influence than others. So with our words, the total amount of communication that our words actually have when we communicate with someone else is only 7%. All right, so only 7% of your overall communication comes from the actual words that you say. And that's really tiny, isn't it? Because we often put quite a lot of emphasis and importance into what we're actually saying. I've got my new Kickstart employees on the phone at the moment, and they're calling up people that have inquired about our business. And we've carefully crafted a script for them to use that they can feel comfortable and confident saying, and eventually they'll be able to learn that script off by heart. But one of the things that I notice is that there can be a real difference in how that script comes across if they say it monotone with their voice all on one level. So, hi, this is Gemma calling from NLP for Kids. You recently made an inquiry about our franchise. Sounds really different to if you put some like light and shade into your intonation, if you make it a bit more melodic, and so it's almost a bit more sing-songy as you say it sounds a lot more engaging. Hi, this is Gemma calling from NLP for Kids. I'm just getting back to you because you inquired about our children's franchise. Like suddenly it feels like there's some life in there. So tone of voice is really important for conveying emotionality and what it is you want to get across to people. And tone of voice accounts for 37% of your communication when you're talking to someone else. So all of that effort that we've put into carving out the right script, it's actually only 7% really. The most important thing is, or not the most important things, but one of the more important things is going to come from the tone of voice that you use when you come to say it. So that's a big old chunk that we've got going on there. So I think I said 37%, it's not, it's actually 38% for your tone of voice. So the final area that we've got there is your physiology. So that just means how you physically use your body whilst you are communicating. The example I gave you earlier is that if you turn your back and walk away from someone when they're saying something important, even if you say the right thing, so you use the right words, and you sound like, you know, you're really genuinely engaged. So you've got your tone of voice on point as well. If your physical body communicates disinterest, that's the message that they're going to get, is the disinterest, because your physiology is going to communicate far more than your words or your tone of voice ever will. It's a whopping 55% of your overall communication comes from your physical body. In fact, you might be familiar with the saying, actions speak louder than words. And what that saying actually means is the way in which you physically act tells me more than what you say. You know, if you have a friend or a partner or a parent who constantly says to you, oh yeah, we'll get that done at the weekend, and you think to yourself, yeah, actions speak louder than words, what you're saying to yourself in that moment is, I'll believe it when I see you do it. I can't believe it just on the basis of you having said it. Like, that's not enough. So what we want to be able to see in our communication with people is that they are physically backing up what they're saying with their words and how that's coming across in their tone of voice. And going back to my example of, you know, the guys that I've got here that are working on the phone at the moment, actually, even though it's on the telephone and you can't see their physiology, you know, we could probably take physiology out of the equation if we're on the telephone. Actually, it still makes a difference. I once worked with a lady who is a voice actor. So these are the people that you hear on the radio doing all of the cheesy radio adverts. And she said, and she absolutely swore by the fact, that you can hear a smile in somebody's voice. So when she was recording adverts for Cadbury's or McDonald's or all of these major companies, she would go off to a voice booth. Nobody ever knew what she looked like. She was never seen. But she would get locked away in this little booth where she would make her recording. And she had to make a point, no matter how she was feeling that day, she had to make a point of forcing a smile on her face. Because if it was an advert which was supposed to convey a good, happy feeling, which typically McDonald's and Cadbury's do, then she would have to put a big smile on her face so that that would affect her intonation and it would change the way that she delivered the message in the advert. So having the right physiology, even if your physiology cannot be seen, even if no one's looking at your body because you're on the telephone, is still super important. Your voice is going to sound different if you are sat up versus if you're kind of slouching down. And that will just, you know, on a physical level, it's going to make a difference because it will change your lung capacity and how much air you can take in, and therefore how much enthusiasm you can put into what you say, or how long your sentences can be. So we can understand that our physical bodies make a really big difference in how we communicate what we communicate. Now, sometimes when you're in the workplace, you're going to get asked to do stuff that you don't really want to do necessarily. And it's going to be important that you don't let your face show the fact that you don't necessarily want to do this job, because otherwise you're going to be communicating that negativity, even if you agree and say the right thing. So your communication is a whole package of different things. It's not just the words that you say. Now, something else that's really useful and important for you to know about communication is that we all have a slightly different way of doing it. And this isn't based on where you've grown up or what your accent sounds like or what you've even learnt from your parents, although all of those things are quite important. It actually relates to your preference in your communication style. So we all have our own unique communication preferences, which tie in with the sensory system that we most like to use. Now, if you think back to your primary school days, you know that there are 5 different senses, and they are seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling. But when it comes to communicating, we're probably not smelling and licking people very much in order to get information about them. So it more relies on what we see, what we hear, and what we feel. And those are the 3 main systems that we gravitate towards using in the context of our communication. So what I'm going to share with you now is going to help you to identify which one is your preference and what preferences other people around you might have. The reason why it's important for you to know about other people's communication preferences is because when you communicate back to them in a way that they prefer to communicate themselves, you're more likely to get your message through. If you communicate with someone in a different way to how they prefer to communicate, they're less likely to really tune in and listen in the way that you might want them to. And this all forms part of what we refer to as rapport building. And rapport building is just about making sure that we feel connected with other people and that we've got really good, clear communication with them. You know that you've got some people in your lives where you can click with them. Maybe they're people that you might not even see for ages, but when you sit down and start chatting, it's like you left off from, where you'd finished last time, because your communication with each other is so comfortable. And you've also by now had the experience of clunky communication, let's say. And that's when you sit down, you talk with someone and it just feels like a bit stilted, it doesn't flow properly. Maybe you have that thing where you go to talk and they go to talk at the same time, you both go, and it gets a little bit like that. It's just really uncomfortable. So that would be an example of the rapport not quite being there. One of the main processes that we use to create better rapport, so better connection, is something called matching and mirroring. And because we've got 3 different ways in which we communicate, we've also got 3 different ways in which we can match and mirror with other people. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview as to how you can do that in each of these 3 areas. And then we're going to kind of break down those different communication styles. And that will also tie in with that rapport building too. So one of the main processes that we use for building rapport with other people, building connection with them, so we've got good solid communication, is matching and mirroring. And that just means that you do the same as the other person does. If we were thinking about that from a physiology perspective, which is a good one to focus on because it's such a big chunk in our communication, it's that whopping 55%, it would be a case of looking at how the person is using their body. If they've got their arms folded whilst they're talking to you, fold your arms, all right, because you're matching with them. Now, if they unfold their arms and put their hands on their hips, it means that you gradually unfold your arms and put your hands on your hips too. Don't do it instantly because that will look a bit weird. If they're leaning over to one side, you also lean over to one side. So this is really easy stuff. And the good news is that physiology is probably the easiest thing to match and mirror, and it has the biggest influence. Now, when it comes to tone of voice and words, there are going to be other things that we can match and mirror there as well. So for example, with tone of voice, if you were matching and mirroring my tone of voice right now, you might notice that I'm speaking quite fast, that I'm probably speaking quite loudly, and that hopefully I'm articulating my words quite well. So in order to match and mirror with me, you would make a point of speaking fast, speaking quite loudly, and articulating your words. But if you notice that after a period of time of talking to me that my voice had slowed down quite a lot, maybe there was quite a few more pauses in there, maybe I was being a bit more breathy in how I was speaking, then you would make the effort to change your voice and use it in a similar way. Now, one thing to mention with the tone of voice, don't do accents, all right, because you'll never do them as well as you think you're going to do. If you're speaking to someone who has an accent, do not attempt to adopt their accent in order to create rapport and connection and better communication with them. It's likely to end up in a slap. Plus, it might end up being quite offensive. So we're going to avoid using people's accents as a way to create better communication with them. And then finally, we've got the actual words that people say. And we can match and mirror specific key words that they use to create better connection with them better rapport, and therefore more of our communication is going to get through. They're going to be tuned in and listening much more than they would do otherwise. And that's kind of where this next chunk of information comes in. So as I was saying, when we communicate, we tend to have one of our senses that we prefer to use. So some people are very visual. Some people kind of pick more things up from listening than they do from perhaps looking at something. And other people tend to be what we would call kinesthetic, which means that they need to kind of like get their hands dirty, you know, get in and do things before they really tune into it and really pick that up. Now, you might be aware of some of this stuff already, because in schools these days, they talk a little bit about this from the perspective of your learning style. So you might already know that you are a visual learner, that in order for stuff to sort of stick in your brain, you need to see it. You might already know that you are a more kinesthetic learner, and that you need to like go through the process and do an experiment or do the steps in order for you to really wrap your head around something and learn it. So this works in exactly the same way, except that sometimes your learning style might be different to your communication style, but we're working under the same banner here of your different sensory systems. Now, the one thing that we talk about within NLP, which is slightly different to what you might have heard before, as well as having visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, we have another system that we talk about, which isn't part of your regular five senses, and it's called auditory digital. All right, auditory digital. Now, there's a bit of a clue in the name as to what that means. And auditory digital is all about how you process information and talk to yourself inside your head. So it very much relates to language. The reason why this system isn't talked about as part of your five senses is because your five senses are ones that you are born with, whereas auditory digital is a system that comes along later because it relates to language, and you are not born with language. So I will tell you very shortly about what generalizations we can make about someone who is auditory digital and what we might notice about them. But other things to notice about these different sensory systems, or representational systems, as we call them in NLP, is that sometimes your representational system might change. So, for example, I would typically classify myself as a highly visual person. I will, when we work through this list in just a minute, I tick pretty much all of those boxes that clarify what a visual person is like. However, depending on the task I am doing, my representational system might shift, and my preferred representational system might become something different. So as I mentioned to you at the very beginning there, one of the things that I do a lot of is making videos and podcasting. And when I come to do that job, I spend more time focusing on how my voice is sounding on the audio, and if there's any background noise or if there is any distractions going on an auditory level. And so that kind of focus and tuning in on that auditory basis in those moments shifts my representational system. It shifts my preferred representational system for when I'm doing that aspect of my job. I become less visual and I become more auditory. So I'm going to share these with you, and you might think, well, sometimes I'm this, but sometimes I think I'm that. And that's completely normal. There will be one that you gravitate towards most of the time. It will probably be the same one that you go to in times of stress. But you might also notice that there are certain parts of your job or certain relationships that you interact in where your representational system appears to change. So I'm going to share these with you, and you're going to be having a think to see if you can identify what representational system you think you are and maybe what representational system your co-workers might be. And when you can start to identify, that person who sits at the desk next to me, I think they might be this representation system, it almost gives you the code, the language that you need to talk to them in, so that your communication really gets through for that particular person. It's literally like you're going to be speaking their own unique language. So it's really useful to identify these things in other people, not just in yourself. All right, so first of all, let's talk about being a visual person. Here are some generalizations, so they may not all apply, that typically apply to a visual person. They tend to stand or sit upright, so their spine tends to be quite straight. So these aren't typically slouchy people. They tend to be sort of, quite upright. And I think that's because, generally speaking, everything about a visual person is kind of quite fast paced. So it's almost like they're on high alert a lot of the time. We'll notice that their eyes move up and around like this. So if you watch my eyes right now, like they'll be looking up when they're talking and communicating, their eyes will be doing this. Now, the reason why that happens is because there's a correlation between how your brain is thinking and where your eyes go in that moment. So if I say to you, like, don't focus on the screen right now, just kind of go into your mind, and I want you to remember what color was the bedroom that you grew up in. So when you were a child, what color was your bedroom? And as you remember that, you go, what did my bedroom look like? You might notice that your eyes kind of like go up, that your head tips back and you look around there. So that's because as you are visualizing that bedroom that you grew up in, your eyes need to go up in order to pull on that particular memory. So we see visual people when they're visualizing stuff that they've either remembered or stuff that they're constructing and thinking about, that their eyes are going to go up. So they tend to have high-pitched, loud, fast, clear speech. And so they like to learn from seeing stuff. Like they need to kind of see it being done or see it written out for them. That is the best way for them to learn. They tend to breathe from the top of their lungs and they speak from their throat area. So if you are a visual person, one of the things that is important to get good at if you are required to speak a lot is that you breathe deeply, because visual people, I say this as one, find it easy to just take like short, quick breaths and then blast out what they want to say. And if you do that all day, you end up getting a very sore throat. They tend to be neat, tidy, and well-groomed and conscious of their appearance. That's because they're interested in visual stuff. So quite simply, they like things to look nice. All right, so they're going to be the person with the tidiest desk. They're going to be the person that, if they come into work and they've maybe overslept and didn't get time to do their hair and makeup or put their outfit together in the way they normally would do, they're going to be a bit out of sorts that day because they know they don't look as good as they could have done. And they are not good at memorizing auditory instructions. So they're not good at memorizing an instruction that has been said to them. The reason why is because if you give a visual person an instruction, they need to see what they're supposed to do. If they hear what they're supposed to do, that information won't stick as well, because they're not making a picture in their mind to go with it necessarily. So if, for example, I was driving and I got lost and I pulled over and I said, how do I get to this place? Like, can you give me some directions? If the person that I spoke to gave me directions like third left, second right, straight ahead, and then left again, like, I've already forgotten it. Like, I have no idea what they just said to me. But if they give me visual markers, so if they say, when you see the Shell garage, take a left, then you'll see the post box. When you see the red post box, turn right. So if they say those sorts of things, in my mind, I'm visualizing, I know what a Shell garage looks like, I know what a post box looks like, and it's much easier for me to follow the instructions. So if you're a visual person, you will have heard some of that and gone like, yeah, that sounds like me. But as I say, most importantly, like, see if you can start noticing some of those qualities in the people that are around you. Because if you notice that your coworker, when you talk to them, is always looking up like this, and that they tend to use lots of visual words in what they say. So they might say things like, well, it looks to me as if I see it from this perspective. So if they're using words like look and see, that's going to be a clue that they're a visual person. When you communicate to them, do it in their language. Say, all right, it looks to me as if you've worked really hard on this today. Or like when you talk to them, make sure you speed up and that you talk a bit faster like they do. And that's going to help your communication get through to them better, because you will be talking in their language. All right, so auditory people, let's talk about them. Auditory people, so these are the people that they are most affected by what they hear rather than what they see. So for their eye patterns, the way that their eyes move, it tends to be more out to the side rather than going up, particularly if they are recalling something or they're trying to solve a problem in their mind. You'll notice that their eyes go out to the sides. So that's going to be a big clue that you're dealing with an auditory person if you see that. They tend to breathe more so from the middle of their chest. And this in itself will change the way their voice tone sounds compared to a visual person. So where our visual person was quite speedy and punchy and da 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 like this, with our auditory person, we're going to notice that the speed of their speech is a little slower. They're taking deeper breaths. There tends to be a bit more melody to their voice. So they tend to use a greater range in their voice tone. So there's more times when it goes down and other times when it comes up. And they're quite comfortable having that real sort of light and shade and variation in their voice tone. This is someone who is easily distracted by noise. Now, do you remember I said earlier that when I'm doing my podcasting, I turn into an auditory person in those moments, like my vision is switched off. Well, I was once recording a podcast with one of my co-workers, and she had, I don't have one here, I don't think, but she had one of those pens with the clicky lids, you know, like the ballpoint pens, when you click it, like the nib comes down. And we were recording this podcast, which was going to go up on Apple Music. So it's kind of a big deal. And for the first, I don't know, this didn't last long, so maybe only about 3 minutes, when she was talking, she was simultaneously going click, 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 click with this pen. And I had to stop the recording because it was driving me bananas. And I can imagine if anyone else was going to listen to that show, it was going to drive them bananas as well. So our auditory people are easily distracted by noise. As a generalization, they like talking on the phone and listening to music, although I would say that's something that can apply to many people with all sorts of different communication styles. They can repeat words back exactly as they have heard them. So you don't want to go getting into an argument with an auditory person, because in 10 years' time, they'll still remember everything you said and how you said it. All right, so auditory people are really good at that. If we wanted to give them instructions, we're going to be verbalizing the instructions to these people because, like we've just said, they can remember words back exactly. So if you are working with your colleague and you start thinking, you know what, this person over here, I reckon they're auditory, because they communicate in that way that Gemma explained to me on the Kickstart webinar. So I need to make sure that I give them very clear, precise verbal instructions. Because if I'm clear and precise with my verbal instructions, they're going to be able to follow that really easily because they're an auditory person. All right, next one, kinesthetic. So as we said, our kinesthetic people are touchy-feely. So what I mean by that is they tend to be a bit more in touch with their emotions. But also what we see with kinesthetic people is that they like physical closeness as well. And that's quite different to, for example, our visual person. In fact, in a lot of ways, our visual people and our kinesthetic people are like on different ends of the spectrum. And I'll explain why in just a minute. So if we're communicating with a kinesthetic person, what we're going to notice with them is that they breathe very deeply. So the air is literally coming from the bottom of their lungs. And that really does slow down the way in which they communicate. You might notice with a kinesthetic person that this causes the pitch of their voice to be lower. They will speak more slowly, but it might also be quite a bit quieter, might even sound a bit more breathy as they are speaking. And alongside that, they move quite slowly and deliberately. So you can see already how these people contrast quite drastically from our visual people. Now, remember, we tend to naturally like people who are more like us. And so it might at times prove to be quite challenging if we have a visual and a kinesthetic person who need to work with each other and communicate with each other in the workplace. They might find it quite challenging. The kinesthetic person might be saying, wow, that visual guy over there, he drives me crazy because he's just like, you know, he's just so aggressive in his voice, and he's he's always in such a rush. And then our visual person might be like, oh man, that kinesthetic woman, she drives me crazy. I just wanted to speed up and get the words out. And I'm like sitting there tapping my foot, wondering when she's going to say what it is she actually wants to say. So we might notice that there's these real polarities in the difference in how they communicate with each other. Our kinesthetic person will respond to touch and physical reward. So this is someone that if you want to say good job to them, that maybe you go over and you give them like a tap on the shoulder, like good job, well done. And you use that as a way to let them know that they've been acknowledged. Whereas our visual person, they're probably going to want a gold star, like a shiny sticker. And our auditory person just needs to hear you say it. And they will tend to, again, as a generalization, lean in and stand closer than a visual person. A visual person likes to stand back so that they can see you properly. They want to take in all the information about your body whilst they communicate with you. Whereas a kinesthetic person wants to get in close because they want to feel the vibe that you're giving off, because they're working more on an emotional level. And our auditory person is going to be somewhere in the middle there. All right, so let me finally tell you then about auditory digital. And this is the system, you remember I said, this one is a system that we are not born with. This is not part of our regular 5 senses. This one comes later because it mainly relates to language and analysis. And language is something that we're not born with it. It doesn't come along until later. So AD people, which is the abbreviation for auditory digital, they tend to be talking to themselves all the time, like inside their head. They're a real jibber jabber going on up there. They learn by making sense of things. So they have to understand the terms and conditions. They need to know all of the, not just about the details, it's more about the framework of the whole thing. Now, this does tend to be quite tension inducing. So if you're an auditory digital person, you might find that you actually get quite a lot of tension in your back and in your shoulders, because this one tends to make the physical body quite rigid. They can take on the characteristics of all of the other systems that we've talked about there, but they like things to work in sequence. They tend to like order, systems, calculations, like it has to make sense for them. They don't enjoy dealing with the slightly more abstract. And one generalization I would make about auditory digital in terms of what their voices might sound like, these are people whose voices may tend to be more monotone sounding than any of the others. So where I said, for example, with auditory, we see a lot of dancing and melody in that person's voice tone. It goes up, it goes down. With auditory digital, it's more likely to sound a little tiny bit robotic and a bit more like this. So they tend to really just want to get the information out, and that there isn't quite so much color and shade in how they end up saying it as they are saying it. So, final thing about this chunk whilst we're here is identify who you are in all of this so that you can be aware of what your communication preference is going to be and why you're gravitating towards the people that you feel most closely aligned to. But start practicing with the other systems, because as you identify those in other people, you'll be able to start talking their language, and your communication comes across so much better when you do. And by the way, all of that stuff that I've just shared with you applies when you're on the phone too. In fact, in some ways, there's a lot of it that's easier when you're on the phone, because you can really pay attention to how fast someone's speaking, how much variation there is in their voice tone, whether they're loud, whether they're quiet, and then you simply match and mirror. So you feed back using their system to build your communication and make it even stronger. All right, so the final thing I'm going to share with you is one that is most relevant to my current Kickstarters, and this happens all the time with every single new employee I take on. I feel like this is something I need to teach from the very beginning going forward. And that is when we communicate, one of the things that we do is we communicate based on different levels of detail or different levels of abstraction. So I've got quite an interesting chart here on the screen. Let me just explain this to you to drill down into this even deeper. In the very middle there, it says any idea, concept, or thing. Now, for argument's sake, let's just imagine that thing, that idea, or that concept that's in the middle of that chart right now is fruit. All right, the fruit that you eat. Just imagine that in the middle of that box, it says fruit. Now, one of the things that we can do when we are communicating is we can go bigger picture and more broad on the idea, concept, or thing that we're discussing, or we can go the other way and get into nitty-gritty detail. So you'll see that either side of our idea, concept, or thing, if we go up, it goes up into an overview, a big idea, and then like global concepts. And if we go the other way and we go down, it goes into detail, finer detail, and then very specific details. So if we were starting in the middle with fruit, the overview of fruit could be food. And the bigger idea on that could be nutrition. And the global concept on that could be life. All right, so it goes into a really big abstract idea. If we were going the other way and we were still using fruit, detail on fruit could be apples or bananas or oranges. Now, if we picked one of those, let's say we go with oranges and we go finer detail on the orange, then it could be the variety of orange. And then if we went very specific details, we could be looking at, is it seedless? Is it not seedless? What country did it come from? And it gets more and more detailed from there. Now, one of the things that I notice happening in my own office a lot is when someone has got started working on something and they're really in it, like they're really in the task that they're doing, and I'm doing something completely different, they'll ask a question which is very specific to what they're doing in that moment. And I don't have any clue what the context is. I don't know if we're talking about fruit. I don't know if we're talking about dogs. I don't know if we're talking about their work. But the question will just kind of go, flare. There's the question, like, what tag do I need? And I have to say, give me some context around this. So what I'm asking them in that moment is, give me an overview of the problem that we're looking at here. And sometimes I'll get one layer of information and I'm like, no, I still haven't, like, what are we talking about? Like, I still haven't grasped it. And then I need a bit more information. At other times it goes the other way. Sometimes they'll say, I'm in Infusionsoft, which is our customer management system. What do I do? And then I'm like, I need more detail. Let's go the other way down the chunking chart. What specifically are you doing in there? What specifically is it that you want to do with that? Where specifically are we going to? And so then I have to work them down the chunking chart in the other direction to get the information that we need. Now, this is a really useful chart to just kind of like freeze frame it in your mind, because quite often people have miscommunications simply because they're kind of talking about the same subject, but they're just in different places on that chunking chart. Someone's like really getting bogged down in the details. Someone else is being really big picture and abstract concepts about it. And it sounds like they are either having an argument or they're not understanding each other in some way. And all it is that they kind of need to move the conversation so that they're both working on the same level. They're both working on the same level of idea, concept of thing, overview, or details. And that makes the conversation come through much more clearly. Typically, what we end up lacking most easily is the details. All right. So it's really easy for people to miss out on the details, and that's when things can get messy. The reason why we avoid it is because we've kind of evolved into accepting and almost demanding quick communication. And quick communication typically doesn't involve details. It's very difficult to get all of your details over to someone if you want to communicate quickly. You know, if I said to Jade, who works here, Jade, I need you to go out to the shops and get a bag of sugar. And I was not specific about what size I wanted that bag of sugar to be, what make of sugar I wanted that sugar to be, for what purpose we needed that sugar, then she could come back with a bag of icing sugar because her mum is a baker and she is used to seeing icing sugar everywhere. And so in her world, when you say sugar, that's what she thinks of. So it's down to me as the communicator to be really specific about the message that I want to get across or the question that I'm asking. And if you ever have the experience where, I don't know, even something like you're sat there watching TV or you're working on something, your mind's in a very specific place, and someone asks you a question and it feels like it's such a million miles away from what you were just thinking about, you're just like, what? And it's like it takes you a moment to even process the question. It's because they're running a completely different chart, so the pink chart that you've got on the screen there, than the one that you've got running in your head. And so then you've got even more work to do, because you've kind of got to go like, what specifically are you talking about? And from where I was just in my head and what I was thinking about, how do I get over there now to what it is that they're trying to communicate to me about? So this chart is a really useful thing, because you can find out like what page someone is on in their mind, and you can get more detail about it, or you can find out more about why they are asking you to do the things that they want to do, because maybe they've got a big idea that this relates to, which they failed to communicate to you. But if you start asking them, for what purpose are we doing that, then that will start taking you in the direction of getting those questions answered, so that you know why you're doing what it is that you're being asked to do. And of all of the things that I've shared with you today, this is the one that I think can really help you out the most in getting very clear communication and being very clear with your communication. So when you communicate, typically you're going to be needing to give more detail than you're comfortable giving. So if you're doing a task and you get stuck on it, then you want to be turning to the person next to you and saying, I'm doing this thing. I got to this stage, I've got stuck here. Do I do this next, or do I do that next? That's going to really help them to help you. But if what you say to them is, I've got stuck, what do I do? Then they may be a bit lost when it comes to them then giving you the right advice to help you move forward. If you're being asked to do something and you don't understand the purpose of it, and it's really holding you back from engaging in the task, then you want to be asking the kinds of questions that are going to take you up on this pink chart towards like the bigger ideas and the global concepts. Like, for what purpose am I doing this? Why is this helpful for us to do? What does this relate to? What direction does this take us in? Because when you get sold on the reasons why the organization you're working for is asking you to do the things that it asks you to do, it's much easier for you to invest your own enthusiasm into doing those things. So some of this responsibility lies with the communicator. But if you are being communicated to in a way that you don't understand, it then becomes your responsibility to ask the right questions and lead yourself around this chart of different chunks in the best possible way. All right, so final things from me to mention are, we firstly have a website, and on there's lots of different self-development products and resources that you can tap into. There is a blog page with tons of stuff that's on there for free. And we also have various different levels of training that you can attend with us too. So you can visit peoplebuilding.co.uk for that. And you can reach out to me via Gemma at peoplebuilding.co.uk. In addition, as I mentioned at the start there, we do have our own YouTube channel. And on our YouTube channel, there is a video that goes out at least once a month, where we share lots of stuff, a bit like we have done here today, and give you tips around different strategies that you can put into practice in real life to help change your relationships and how you're getting on in your workplace as well. There's an audio version of that that goes out onto all different podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and all of the other major podcasting platforms that you can find. And you will be able to get details of that also through our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/people building. And that is everything from me here today. All right.
So, thanks for that, Gemma. That was brilliant as ever, and really, really useful. Hopefully people who watched it live and the lots of people who watch it afterwards will get lots of benefit from that. And if they've got any questions, all your details are there to get in touch with. So is there anything else you want to add to that, or?
I don't think so. I think I've blasted them with enough information to play with for now.
Yeah, so we'll hopefully see you next time, and hopefully all the Kickstarters and employers that watched this now or in the future have benefited from it a lot. So thanks a lot, Gemma. Take care.
Thank you very much.